Okay, we've taken a break. We're back. Still Thursday, June 7th, session 2. We're going to finish the remainder of the assignment B steps. So we've got the heights of our exterior walls. Now we're ready to create our foundation walls. So the way I like to do it, and it's not the only way, but what Revit normally does is it wants to go down from the level you're at when you're creating foundation walls. So if we go to, first of all, I said to make a new wall type, but I think my template that I gave you probably already has that under walls. Yeah. I knew there was something else I needed to get rid of out of the template. Basic wall, there's already a foundation rubble 13-inch wall type. So that's the wall type we're going to use. But we want to place those foundations in plan, because if you try to draw a wall in 3D, it doesn't quite understand what level it should be referencing. So I'm going to go up to my views and pull up the work level 1 view again. And I'm going to change it to 1/4 inch scale. And I'm going to basically plop my foundation walls underneath my brick walls. And because we're using a specific wall type, that foundation rubble 13-inch wall type, it has a property that says that that wall type is a foundation wall. If we go down in a browser to wall types, and we double-click Foundation Rubble 13, see where it says Function, Foundation. That's one of the type properties that can be set in a wall. Interior, exterior, foundation, retaining soffit, or core shaft wall. These foundation walls behave differently. So that's why what I want you to do when you're creating this is to open up your 3D and your plan. You can use the WT shortcut to tile the two views on the screen, WT, and then ZA to zoom all for both windows. And I'm going to spin around and I'm going to start on this side. So as I create the wall in plan, I can't really see it pop up in plan, but I'll see it pop up in the 3D view as I go. So I'm going to go to Home and Wall. I'm going to select that foundation rubble wall. Now I'm ready to place the walls, but before I do, I want to check my options in my properties palette. The options bar says the depth of the wall instead of the height of the wall. So when we were creating brick walls, this little button said height, and it could have let us, if we'd thought about it, pick the plate height. So as we drew those brick walls, they would have gone up to the plate height. Well, now it says you're doing a foundation wall type, so I'm going to go down from there. And instead of unconnected 20 feet, which I saw at least a couple of you had, because you didn't know to go up here and do this, and I have a little note in my screenshot that's kind of small, so I want to make sure and cover it. Depth should go down to top of footing. Now, I could trace the walls, but I want to use this other tool. This draw panel gives you all the shapes you can draw. We've done line and we've done rectangle. Well, now I want to use this Pick Lines button, which means when I pick the face of one of those brick walls, it's going to put the face of my foundation wall right at that same face. But I want to make sure that my location line is not going to the center line of the foundation, but going to the exterior finished face. Because the goal is to have the foundation wall right underneath the brick wall so that it's bearing all the way down to the ground, obviously. So the outside face of brick should be flush to the outside face of the stone wall. So I say location line, finish face exterior. I'm in the Pick Lines button. And so when I hover over the outside of brick, it lights up the outside face in blue, but notice how there's also a dotted line that pops up. If you hover to the right, it goes to the left. If you hover to the left, it goes to the right. We want it to go to the right because we want the rest of the thickness of the wall to go inward. So I click it when it's inboard. And now if I double check, my foundation wall really is under my brick wall, and that's what I want. So it's really important to get that part right. And that's part of the reason I have you do the little screenshots before you submit it. So hopefully you might even catch your own mistake and see, oops, I've got ledges that kind of poke out from the brick. So now I can go ahead and do the rest of the walls that same way, but it's good to kind of keep the 3D up here to make sure I haven't goofed. So I'm going to go on and say, pick lines again. I'm going to come back in this view and pick that one, and then this one, that one, that one, that one. Just make sure the dotted line goes in. Once you've started, you should be able to carry on and then I've got one more wall. So that's why I was telling some of you, just if you got them wrong, it's probably quicker to delete them all and start fresh and get them right from the beginning. Now that's not the only way to do Revit. You can always fix things one way or another, but sometimes you spend more time chasing your tail over all the things that are wrong and say, well, I know I got to just redo them and do them right from the beginning, because that took me took me only a few seconds. It still shouldn't take you as long as it might have. So there's our foundation walls. We'll just double check it, admire it for a minute. And now we want to add footings on the bottom of those walls. So now we're ready for step 4. And there's really not a whole lot you can do wrong with footings. There's only maybe 2 possible mistakes you can make. And I know some of you have already made the first mistake. And I put it in here just so you had something for me to keep you honest. Otherwise it would have been too easy. You go to, now Tatiana pointed out that I had, in my notes I said go to the Home tab and there's a Structure panel. But that says Revit 2010. In Revit 2012 there's an actual Structure tab. So I need to correct that. I've already circled that. So then you look for the Foundation panel and say I want a wall foundation. So now here's the first possible mistake. If you look at the type here, we don't want to use the retaining footing type, because a retaining footing assumes a retaining wall. And for those of you who maybe know a little bit more about structures, a retaining wall has a toe and a heel is deeper than the toe, so that the soil that's behind the wall that's being retained helps keep the wall from turning and flipping forward. So it's going to be, basically, it's going to be an asymmetrical footing that goes out further from the wall on one side than the other. So if I don't change that, it's defaulting to the retaining footing. And so if I pick on one of those and I look at it, sure enough, that footing is too wide on the inside compared to the outside. So if I escape out of it, I'm going to change it to the bearing footing, 36 by 12, which is the one I said to use. And so now that footing is symmetrical. I'm pretty sure I said, yeah, 36 by 12 bearing footing. And I even said try placing one of the retaining footings to see the difference. So if you compare them, you can see it's not really a huge magnitude of difference, but you can tell. See, there's that one. So I want to be in the 3D view. I could be in my top of footing view, which is a view that I've asked you to create. And I'm trying to think where in which step did I say? Yeah. So on step 4, I said let's make a view called top of footing. And so the way I did that is I said, yeah, and that's also a little out of date, because I said use the floor plan button on the view design bar tab. Well, it's the view tab of the ribbon. And there's a plan views button here. And it says floor plan. So if you click on that, Revit gives me a choice of all the levels that don't already have a floor plan. Now if I was to uncheck this little do not duplicate existing views checkbox, then I could even make a plan on the level that I already have a plan of. But in this case we just want to make a plate height or top of footing floor plan. And so then you can pick your scale here, and I'm going to make that at a 1/4 inch scale. It doesn't really matter because we're not going to put it on a sheet. Now, what's wrong with this view? Well, first of all, I'm seeing walls that don't look like they joined properly. Whenever you see something like that, in this case I goofed, because see how those 2 walls aren't cleaning up and the line weight looks funny on this one compared to that one? I just kind of learned over time that when that looks that way, Revit is pretty good about cleaning wall intersections. See how clean it is there and there. So I figured out that that means you've got 2 walls, one on top of the other. And if I do a crossing window, this little button down here, which you can't see, should say 2 next to the funnel. So if I just pick one of those walls and delete it, that cleans up the problem, because I just had 2 walls on top of each other. Okay, so now I've created my top of footing view, but what I mentioned is we want this to set the view range of this plan. View range is a property of plan views that says, okay, how deep are you looking and how high are you cutting? Because remember, our kind of paradigm of what a floor plan is, we're taught that it's like slicing through the building 4 feet looking down. Well, Revit is very literal about that. It's really got a cut plane height that could be 4 feet, or you could change it. And you look how deep. Well, by default, the plan view range is only looking as far as that level. So if we go to our view properties and scroll down, that's where we find this view range edit button right there. So we're going to leave the cut plane at 4 feet, but we're going to drop the bottom to unlimited because those footings are right at the level where we're stopping. And for some reason, structural items, if the top of the structural thing is right at the level where your view stops, it doesn't show up. Whereas if you had a floor right at the level where your view stops, it shows the floor. It just won't show a footing or a beam or another structural item. So if you change those two lower settings to unlimited, now you can see your footing in the plan view because you're looking down all the way to the center of the earth, basically. And now you could use this view to place your footings, or you could use the 3D view. Either one works. So I'm going to go ahead and place some footings now from my top of footing view just to show that's actually pretty easy. And the nice thing about doing it in the floor plan is if you pick the wrong footing type, the lopsided retaining footing, you see immediately, if you're watching carefully, that that's a lopsided footing, and change it back to the bearing 36 by 12 footing type. So now I can go back and do the rest of my wall footings and make sure I'm picking bearing 36 by 12. And now if I put the rest of them in there, they all look correct. And Revit is pretty good about cleaning up all the joints in the footings. So if the two walls clean up, the two footings are going to clean up in most cases. Yeah? Okay. Then probably what's going on is your view range in the top of footing view is not looking deep enough. So pull up that top of footing plan view and scroll down in the view properties to view range edit. And then just change the bottom and the view depth level to unlimited. Yeah, because your work L1 existing arc floor plan, they're showing in mine too. And so that probably means that the view range in this view is already unlimited, which it is. And we may not necessarily want to keep that unlimited because when we're doing the first floor plan, we may not really want to see the footings. So I could change that here by editing it and say I only want to look as deep as the first floor in this first floor plan. And now we only see the brick walls. So that's, once you get those footings in there, as long as you don't do them bearing footings, you're done. The only other mistake you could make, which I've had very few people make, but it's possible, is if you're placing a wall footing and you click on the brick wall instead of the foundation wall, you could end up with a footing that's up halfway through the wall because footings attach themselves to the base of a wall. So again, if you do the 3D view and you send me a screenshot of it, what's wrong here? My little view cube is not working all of a sudden. I don't see that happen very often. There it is. Sometimes you just fight with it. So there I'm seeing the footings where they should be, and if I go to the opposite corner of the view cube, that side looks good too. So now the last thing we have to do, and we can actually probably finish a little bit early, I'll hang around and help anybody with any questions. Last thing to do is this step 5, change the stone material to have a surface pattern, fill pattern that looks like stone. So I want to talk a little bit about materials in Revit. First of all, if you want to get to the list of your materials, you can go to the Manage Ribbon tab and hit this Materials button here. And it takes a second to pull that up because the materials list, for some reason, has a lot of processing. And it's got a whole list of materials here. And if you scroll up and down, you'll see that one of them says masonry-stone. And then there's one called random ashlar and solid cut stone. Well, we don't necessarily know by looking which of these is the right stone that's in that rubble wall. So the way to find that out is to select the wall and that's called Foundation Rubble 13. That's the wall type. Now, to edit the wall type, if you have it selected, go into this little Edit Type button right below the type selector in your Properties palette. So right now we're looking at the instance properties of that one wall, which includes the base, base offset, top, and top offset. If we edit type, we'll be looking at the properties of that wall type. And that brings up a floating dialog then like this. And then, in order to look at the materials and the layers and the thicknesses within that wall, we go to Edit Structure right here. So there's actually the Properties palette, Edit Type, we go to the Type Properties, and Edit Structure, and we go to a third dialog now. And that third dialog will replace this Type Properties dialog temporarily. And so now we get a little chart that says, okay, you've got a core boundary at the top and the bottom, and those are just kind of placeholders. But then if your wall is made up of plaster and brick, or just a layer of stone, or a layer of plaster and wood and plaster, you'll see these layers kind of laid out within that wall type. Now we can say, okay, what material is in this wall? It's masonry-stone. That's the correct material name. So that's the one we want to go in and modify. Now we're getting the same materials list that we did a minute ago when I said Manage and hit Materials. But by doing it this way, I've selected the right wall, I've dug into the properties of that right wall, and I said this material is the one that's in use in that wall. If I change it here, it'll change it in the database of all the materials, but I'm assured of the fact that I've got the right material name that I'm modifying. So now what I want to modify, there's a couple of different tabs we use in this dialog for the material. The first one says Graphics. The second one says Appearance. The appearance is what it looks like when you either render it or go to the realistic view, which there's a couple of glitches in my materials, so we may have to fix that later. But graphically, this is what you see in the shaded view. And then the surface pattern and the cut pattern will be what you see in an elevation view or 3D view shaded. Or when you're in a plan, the cut pattern is what you'll see when you're slicing through that wall, a wall that has that material in it in plan. It's cut, and it shows a crosshatch. So we want to look at the surface pattern. Right now it says None. So what we want to do, if you do this little pick list, it doesn't give you a choice of two different categories or kind of classifications of patterns. So instead I use this little three-dot browse button here. And the two classifications of fill patterns are drafting patterns and model patterns. So there's two different choices. You want to make sure you're in the right list. How do you know whether you're looking for a drafting or a model pattern? Well, a model pattern, the hatching is going to represent real sizes of like an 8-inch long brick or a 12-inch high piece of stone or a 12-inch wide square tile on the floor. So the surface pattern of the material, in some cases, you want to see it to scale as a real size, and it'll shrink and expand with the scale. If instead you're talking about I'm slicing through a concrete wall, you normally have like a stippling pattern that shows chunks and dots. That's something that's scaled on the piece of paper once you've printed your drawing, and it doesn't care whether it's 12 inches thick or 8 inches thick. If it's at a certain scale on the page, the little chunks are all going to be that same size. Just like a plain crosshatch, they're just going to be 16th inches apart on the page. So those are drafting patterns. A model pattern is what we want because we want the size of the blocks of stone to stay so many inches in the building rather than just being on the page. And once we get into that model pattern list, we go down to the one that's called AE Stone RA. And the way I had kind of named these is A for architectural, E for elevation view, and then stone. And the RA is abbreviation for random ashlar pattern, where you kind of see different size blocks, but they're all kind of have a horizontal top and bottom surface. So we pick that and say OK. Now the other thing I like to do, and I don't know if I've said to do it in here. I didn't. But I like to change the color of the pattern, so instead of those lines being black in the pattern, they're kind of a gray, because graphically, if I show an elevation view, the pattern kind of recedes a little bit from the actual outlines of the building. So I like to click on that color of the hatch and say, this little color dialog, I can just drag this slide bar from black to white. I'm going to go up about 1/4 of the way, so it's kind of a somewhat dark gray and say OK. So now when I finish this, I go OK here, and OK out of the structure, and OK out of the wall type, and now that pattern appears on that wall. And it just depends on the screen how much you're zoomed in and how much you rotate the view and how bright and dark the two sides are. But there's my pattern, and that's the last requirement for this assignment. Any questions on how I got to this point? Like I said, assignment B is a little less involved.
Can you change the pattern? Like if you want that to be really big? I mean, it seems like it's like base brick size.
It looks a little small, yeah. And I had kind of already predefined that, but how it works is the patterns that are used in Revit are actually AutoCAD patterns. And if you've done a lot of work in AutoCAD, you might know that the patterns are saved in an acad.cat file. And if you use different patterns and you download some off the web or you get some from somebody else, or you write a pattern file, which is very hard to do because it's kind of just a bunch of numbers, you have a pat file that stores that information. So Revit, when you get it out of the box, it gives you some patterns, but this particular one wasn't in there. I got this off a CD that came out years ago. It was called StoneCAD CD, and it had a bunch of pat files. But when you import a pattern into Revit, Revit has this duality of either model or drafting pattern. And so if you edit the pat file, there's a little line that says model. And then from there, when you import it into Revit, I'll kind of show you how that works. If I edit the type, edit the structure, click on the material, and I go to pattern here, I can say I want a new pattern. In this case, I'm just going to edit that one. And I say custom, and then I go to import. Now to import it, I have to find one of those .pat files. And after I find it and open it, then I'll get a list of all the patterns inside that file. It'll scroll up here. And then see how below that it says file units or inches, import scale. So I could change the import scale to 2 and basically just re-import that. And then it would be twice the size, but they would still stay. So to kind of prove that this really is a model pattern, what I could do is if I change my scale from ½ inch to equals a foot, let's just check. This block here looks like it's about as wide as the depth of that footing. If I change my scale all the way down to 1/8 of an inch equals a foot, and go back in on that same area, again, that block width hasn't really changed in real size. But a stippling, like see how the stippling, there's like 1, 2, 3 little stipples. If I change it to ½ inch equals a foot, and zoom in, when I change scale, the number of stipples increases because that's sized on the page, and when you change the scale, the stipples don't change relative to the page. The footing looks bigger at a larger scale on the page, so then there's more stipples that show up inside that width of the footing. I hope that makes sense. Any other questions? The foundation walls? Just to kind of review that, that's a little tricky. I'm going to go back to the first floor plan to do it. Level 1 working view. And I'm going to close all the other views and then pull up my 3D, and then I'm going to tile them side by side. And so what I like to do, I'm just going to delete them all and put them back in real quick here. What I like to do is say I'm going to watch it in 3D, but I'm going to place them in plan. So I went into the home and the wall button, and I said the depth should go down to the top of footing. That's important. Again, you could fix it afterwards if you did that wrong, but it's better to know how to get it in right in the beginning. And the location line, it's better if you start with finished face exterior. And then the two ways you can do it from there is leave this draw panel so that it says I'm drawing lines. And if you do that, you snap from one endpoint to another. Well, that's 2 clicks, and it's possible to miss at either end. So the reason I like the other way better is this Pick Lines button. You only have to click once. And as long as you're careful that the little dotted line is going in, when you click it, the face of stone lines up right below the face of brick. Now this error message is telling me that in the view I'm in, which is the plan, what I just created is not visible. But it gives me a hint, and it says you may want to check the active view, its parameters, and visibility settings and plan regions. So what that's saying is, well, maybe you didn't see it because you have walls turned off, or maybe you didn't see it because you're not looking deep enough. Well, it is true that we're not looking deep enough, but even if we were, it'd be hidden underneath the brick wall. So I just closed that warning because that's the whole reason I pulled up my 3D view, so I could see it even though I can't see it there. Now I'm going to continue. I'm going to do a pick wall on this guy. So the only hard part here now is making sure that the dotted line goes in instead of out. Click, 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 click. 2 more clicks and I'm done. Here's all my foundation walls. And hopefully they're all flush with the brick. And the more I zoom in, the more I can tell, yep, they're flush. I'm good. And then I go to the footings, which is the structure tab, wall footing. Make sure I pick the bearing footing 36 by 12. And just click on the base of each wall. Click. And don't be afraid to spin the building so you're looking up at it. And if you get kind of disoriented or you want to get back, just hover over the view cube and hit the little house button. And that'll spin it back right side up for you. Click escape. And I'm going to save that.
What views do we have for the assignment?
The only view you have to actually create to get credit for it in the assignment is this top of footing view. And so one thing about... No. As far as what you see, I'd like you to save a screenshot that looks like this of the 3D view and another one that looks like that so that I can visually see very quickly that all your concrete or stone walls are flush with the brick. You don't have those ledges going on. And then I want one that's zoomed in enough that I can see that you've got that pattern on there. Again, I'm not going to grade off if you don't do that because I can still grade your Revit file and see that it's there, but I'd rather you go through the motions of doing that. And let's see, what else?
You said the top of footing view, when you clicked on that, it didn't show the view. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, there it is. I highlighted it. I don't think I double-clicked it. So you want to double-click. And somehow I got 2 foundation walls there again. I think what I was doing... No, I don't have, yeah, I just need a footing there. So wall footing you can place in plan. It keeps defaulting to that bearing, that retaining footing instead of the bearing footing. So I think what I was doing wrong is when I was clicking on my plan to place the foundation walls, I was clicking once on this side and I came around and I clicked again on that side. And since that's one continuous wall, I placed 2 concrete walls one on top of another. So I'm not paying enough attention to what I'm doing, and that's exactly what went wrong. But Revit's foundation, the footings have gotten better because it used to be they didn't really want to clean up at those intersections right. But now if the wall goes through, the footing goes through. If the wall stops, the footing stops. And now one thing I'll just show you, and it's not required here, I'm going to just very quickly kind of jump ahead since we've got a few more minutes. If I go to my level 0 existing floor plan, and I am going to just jump ahead and put a door in here. If I plop a door in that foundation wall, and I go back to 3D, that door isn't quite as low as the wall where it hits the footing. So I'm just going to kind of fake it here and drop that down to top of footing. See how when there's an opening that hits the bottom of the wall, it wants to break the footing? But there's actually a property of the footing that you can edit in the type properties that says do not break at inserts. So if you were to check that, if there was an opening that went all the way down the wall, the footing still runs right through it. This is not required for the assignment. The other thing you can do is if the opening does go all the way through the footing, you can extend the footing past the end of the opening like this, if you want to. So I could even select this footing and kind of stick him out beyond the corner of the other footing if I wanted to. Again, not required. I'm going to get rid of that door. Just kind of some additional information. Any other footing or foundation wall questions? Yeah. What's that?
Could you look over my shoulder for a minute?
Yeah. Let me go ahead and save and stop the recording, and then when we got time, then I'll just come around and help with individual questions now. Because I think we've covered the bulk of it. Stop the recording. This time it's going to burn before I leave. the quiz